The Craig Foley Show on Deadline Detroit is made possible in part by Lynette's Shrimp House, located in Highland Park. It's Metro Detroit's premier destination, serving juicy fried shrimp, fish, and wings, alongside soul food sides and new additions to the menu like turkey tacos and desserts. Located at 13548 Woodward in Highland Park, just north of the Davison, Lynette's is open for takeaway, noon to 8 Tuesday and Thursday, noon to 10 p.m. Friday and Saturday, and noon to 5 p.m. on Sunday. Call now, get some Lynette's.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the week that was. For those of you who are returning customers, for those of you who are new, welcome for the first time. My name is Saeed Khan, not Craig Foley, and I will be your host for the week that is. We are joined with some excellent panelists to shepherd you through yet another week of news that didn't disappoint. So we will start off by introducing Susan Demas, the founder of Susan J. Demas Communications, as well as the owner of Inside Michigan Politics, and she's also the vice president of Farrow and Associates, a Michigan-based PR firm. Welcome, Susan.
I actually run the Michigan Advance now. Those are some things I did in the past.
You know, this is what happens when your internet is too slow and it hasn't caught up. I stand corrected.
No worries. Just don't want to step on anybody else's toes.
That's okay. The statute of limitations, I think, hopefully is well out on being sued about that. And if not, then I've got Steve Fishman who can represent me. Of course, our veteran high-profile criminal defense attorney. Welcome back, Steve. And also, I believe, a rabid U of M basketball fan, so this is right coming into your season now.
It is getting ready. I don't know. Those of us who played there always object to being called fans, but that's okay if you want to call me a fan.
Maven aficionado, seasoned veteran of the parquet floor as well.
A seasoned veteran of sitting on the bench.
Excellent. And then, of course, we have, and you know, Alan, I've realized that we undersell you by just simply calling Alan Lengel, or the editor of Deadline Detroit. Following in the great tradition of such people as Bernstein, Ozawa, Slotkin, Bugs Bunny, and Mehta, Alan Lengel is our maestro. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, come on. That deserves more of a crescendo, doesn't it?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hello.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. We had another rally in Lansing. On Tuesday, hundreds of people showed up to support an election audit ballot drive for not a future election, but for the old 2020 election. It seems like most, if not all, of those who were there were supportive of not just the process, but one specific candidate and one specific election race, which of course was for the president, feeling jilted that their candidate, Donald J. Trump, was somehow the other deprived of his rightful ascension and election. This was the rally. It wasn't as big as some people thought, but it certainly was still important enough that people were still beating that dead horse into the ground. So, Susan, what do you make of this, and what do you make of this going forward for the 2022 elections and beyond?
Well, it actually was, I think, a fairly disappointing turnout for a rally that was hyped by former President Donald Trump. You would think that you could get more than about 400 people at the Capitol, but then again, he wasn't there. Why I think it was significant, why we covered it, was because you had elected Republican officials there. This audit has been endorsed by members of the Michigan legislature. They're still relitigating the 2020 election. They're still trying to memory hole the insurrection on January 6th. And so we have to keep fact-checking and talking about it, because this is really what excites the base of the Republican Party right now.
So how many of those who showed up were there for just naked opportunism when it comes to trying to get votes, trying to get some face time, maybe trying to get some donations for their campaigns? How many are true believers, and how many are running scared?
I mean, I think that the Republican officials who showed up believe it. I mean, Matt DePerno, who's running for Attorney General, I mean, he definitely seems to be part of this audit grift. There were plenty of people from out of state, like a lot of people from Arizona, who are just on the circuit now. But I would guess that as far as the rally goers go, these are people who really believe it.
I think, I think it's interesting. I watched some of the videos, some of the interviews, and you see people referring and say themselves as great patriots and all that stuff. And it seems to be almost, code word for like Christian, conservative, pro-life, Republican. And I resent them using that word patriot as a great patriot because they're loyal to Donald Trump. I'm sorry, but that's not patriotic to me.
We are joined by Greg Bowen, also a PR specialist. Greg, welcome to the show. What about your take on what happened in Lansing? I mean, how much of this is just really the optics? And as Susan was saying, not really great optics if only a few hundred people showed up. There's some articles that are floating around asking the question that is Donald Trump losing some of his luster within the Republican Party, and maybe except for a core of his base, it seems as though maybe things out there on the periphery are a little bit fluid.
Well, it's still a great organizing tool for him. And in particular, being able to try and intimidate the Republican Party. And so while 400 people, 500 people is not a lot to be on the Capitol on any day, the Capitol's pretty big, and that kind of crowd is dwarfed by the size of the lawn and all that stuff. So it always looks like a small crowd unless you get thousands out there. But at the same time, 400 people, 500 people, and a quarter of them are active in any one legislative district. And now you've got, some leverage in these legislative district races here. Can you impact the congressional races to a great degree? Well, probably not. I mean, you can have a little bit, but at the same time, I think that that it is an organizing tool. And that's what it's for, more than anything else.
Yeah, I remember, I think my high school pep rally against our crosstown rivals fielded more people than what showed up at the state capitol. Steve,
well, you got to remember. Let me add this: you have to remember that these off-election years, you get low turnout, and it's hard to get people to be excited about what's going on. And so, if you can move the needle a few points in any of these small district races, you can make a big difference in the outcome.
Yeah, but I mean, 400 people, Greg. I mean, okay, I get it. These people really care about social distancing, and maybe that's why they didn't show up. Steve, one of the people I noticed who wasn't there was our own gubernatorial aspirant, James Craig, someone who seems to have been trying to latch on to the man from Mar-a-Lago quite fervently. Had a meeting with him, but no report on the outcome of that meeting. What do you think happened, and why was he not in Lansing trying to capitalize, so to speak, on the event at the Capitol?
Well, keeping in mind that I'm not a political expert like Susan and Greg, I think that Chief Craig has put himself in a position that he really is going to wind up in a pretzel bag because he's twisted himself in so many different ways. I just think he doesn't really know. Somebody wrote in the newspaper when he first declared that when police officers, particularly police chiefs, decide to get into politics, they really don't necessarily know what they're getting into. They're used to giving orders and people doing things. They tell their lieutenants do X, Y, and Z, and people do it. And I think that he's he's going to have to try to come in the city and talk to black people about voting for him. And he's not going to really want to answer to them the things that he's now saying about Trump. And it just puts him in an impossible position. I really don't know the man. I know him. I met him a couple of times. Chit-chatted is all. I don't really know him. But it seems to me, just as a reader and a person who's paying attention, that he's really got himself into that pretzel-like. What was Steely Dan's song? Pretzel Logic. That was their album, I think.
Great album.
It's a great album, but that's, they play in a lot of different chords. That's how Steely Dan's music is. I think Chief Craig is kind of feeling like Donald Fagen a little bit right now.
I I spoke yesterday to a Republican who's kind of in the know, and he was speculating on this, but he was saying that one of the reasons Craig may not be getting the endorsement is that the litmus test may be very simple with Donald Trump. Do you believe the election was stolen? Do you believe that I won? And if Craig did not answer that properly, Trump may have said, and I mean, look, the rally in Lansing was about the steal, about the fraudulent election, about Donald Trump really winning, and Craig is not there. And so, we see who was there was the attorney general candidate, who I believe has gotten the endorsement of Trump. So I think it may come down to that for the chief, and I think he may not get the endorsement because I think he may not be willing to go out there and push the lie.
Well, let's not give James Craig too much credit because a few hours after the rally, he dropped a column in the Detroit News just asking questions about having a forensic audit. We'll just put this all to bed. So he's definitely trying to pander to the extremists. Sure. It seems rather inexplicable that a major newspaper would have published such a thing.
Well, age doesn't seem to be too much of an inhibitor for pandering and kissing the Donald's ring in Iowa, and maybe one of the reasons why Trump didn't stop off in Lansing. There was a rally last weekend which brought out in this first state of all the primaries none other than, you guessed it, senatorial candidate again, Chuck Grassley, who I believe will turn 90 halfway through his next term if reelected. And there he was, after quite a few complaints and criticisms on the record, pulling a Lindsey Graham by wanting to have state talk with him. Is this just the kabuki theater that we can expect moving forward? And anyone, Greg?
I think what we're watching is the slow death of of Trump and his folks. We're at the beginning. I don't know. The more he yells, the more it gets quieter in terms of the response. He becomes the show as opposed to the issues around him. And, we have short attention spans as Americans. That's just kind of who we are, right? And after a while, it's just going to be like, oh, my God, here's this guy again. They're still talking about that. I can't believe it. We got all this. You know what I mean? People just sort of get kind of fatigued by it. But as I said, that's the tool for organizing in that toolbox right now. And that's all they got.
Susan, do you think that, this is starting to be on the wane? Are people getting that kind of fatigue even within the Republican Party?
I haven't really seen that. I'm open to the possibility, and I think it would be great for the country to have a Republican Party not attached at the hip to Donald Trump. But the fact that you have Charles Grassley and Mitch McConnell, who are back to kissing Trump's ring after being critical of him following the insurrection, as everyone should have been, I don't think is a great sign. And just in talking with Republican voters, it still seems that Trump is the only thing that animates them. They don't really care about people like Chuck Grassley and Mitch McConnell. They're fine, or not particularly popular, but Trump just, with his rhetoric, with his open racism, with, shredding the Constitution to stay in power, that seems to be what people respond to. They really dig it. So, I guess we'll have to see how 2022 is shaping up if he continues to be a big factor or not.
Well, wait, on that particular point, one of the things I think we need to keep in mind is that every year that Trump was in office, Republicans were getting, regular Republicans were getting off the bandwagon. Once he got removed from office, with the help, I might say, by, what we would consider old school mainstream Republicans, their opportunity to get back in the party and back into that party and begin to take it over again has not really finished yet. I mean, I think that they're still in that fight and trying to grab hold of it. And, Trump is still in the way. I mean, they haven't coalesced around any issue yet enough to be able to make a big difference. And I think that's going to cripple them. And we've seen it in a lot of these elections where the Trump, blessing doesn't really help get people over the top. And so we all know that Trump is a big grifter. And we all know that these rallies and this stuff is all still part of his scheme to raise money. And we all know that he's only out for himself. And so while he may be entertaining, the real work of organizing that's done at a party level is not happening with Trump, beyond helping himself. I mean, it's a great organizing tool for himself, and it's something to get some people excited, but it's not bringing the Republicans that they lost back into the fold.
Right. I think one of the things is that one of the attractions of Trump is that Trump was a winner, that he was able to get back the White House to the Republicans. And, the fact is he lost. And he's still trying to convey this thing that I am the winner. But I think there's doubts. I think there's people who, somebody's taking Trump to the dance, but they're looking around to see if there's someone better they can take home. I think Trump doesn't have a lock, and I think that may be one of the reasons why the crowd was not that big in Lansing. I think there's doubts. Look, he helped lose Georgia. He lost the election. He really doesn't represent the ideology of the party. He's just, he was embraced because he was a winner. Much in the same way, in some ways, that Biden was embraced because he could beat Trump. I mean, not everybody loved Biden, but they saw him as beating Trump. And so I think there's a lot of doubt, either consciously or subconsciously, about Trump and whether he should be their guy in 2024.
And the other thing to keep in mind, too, is about Trump's appeal was that he was entertaining. I mean, let's not forget about that. I mean, the guy was entertaining. He had stage presence. He knew how to crack on people. He insulted people up and down the line. His going down the escalator thing, he was all into the theatrics. And the stage that he's on now has him as a B star or a C star, these days, and not as entertaining as he was when he was on the way up and certain, at the White House. I mean, he captured headlines with just some of the antics that he did. We're not really seeing that, and he's not as entertaining anymore. It's almost like a broken record, repeating over and over and over again. He hasn't given the crowd anything new to latch on when it comes to his personality, and his ability to entertain the crowd is just not there. So if you missed the first run, if you missed the first run, now you're looking at reruns of a second season.
I think the fact that when he said that early on in the campaign, that if I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, people were like, yeah, okay, it's talk. But then after a while, they saw, look, this guy can do anything, and the Senate is going to protect him. That look how many votes. I was shocked. Sorry, but I maybe naively and subjectively, I was shocked by the amount early on in the Tuesday night of the election. Florida went right away. I thought he was going to get killed, and he was getting a lot of votes, and he collected a lot of votes, and so he still has some. I think people are like I say, they've looked to him as a winner, and now I think they're having some doubts about that.
Well, that's true. That's part of what was going on. But let's not forget the entertainment part. Come on. He was a showman. I mean, he had me laughing at the insults he would throw at Ted Cruz and little Marco Rubio and stuff like that,
I spoke to a friend after, this was several months after the election, a friend who works at the New York Times. And I said, well, how are things going? And he said, our traffic is down quite a bit. We have to figure out how to exist in the post-Trump world. And look, he was great for the media. He was great for ratings. He captured every news cycle. He was just an entertainer like no other president we've ever had.
Well, it's interesting that people like Cruz and Hawley and Tom Cotton are all keeping their powder dry. We don't hear much from them. Nikki Haley is trying to get into the ring by invoking not just Trump, but Reagan. She's trying to play the whole spectrum of Republicanism. Maybe she'll learn about Barry Goldwater and Alf Landon as well at this point. But Steve, I mean, when it comes to the Grand Theater, perhaps there's no greater theater than the courtroom. And now we see that happening in the congressional committee hearings. We're moving toward the possibility of criminal contempt charge or contempt of Congress charges on Steve Bannon. The idea that it seems as though the end game is certainly closer, which could very well lead to indictments not only of some of Trump's minions, but perhaps even of Trump himself. Where do you see that one going?
Well, I think we were discussing this today with a couple of my friends who are lawyers. I think they're doing the right thing with respect to Bannon. I think these guys have gotten used to telling everybody to go screw themselves. We're not showing up for this. We don't have to do anything. There's content behind what they're threatening them with. And criminal contempt, as you all know, I'm sure, can result in jail sentences. It's not like civil contempt where you can get out of it just by doing whatever it is that you've so far refused to do. So I believe personally, I mean, I hear all this stuff. These guys all claim to be tough guys. I think all that's bullshit. I think the minute they're actually faced with having to go sit in the can with some of my guys that I represent, I don't think they're going to be such tough guys. And I think they have to follow through with this. They have to follow up on it. They have to take them to court with it, and they have to charge them. And then I read something interesting. I think it was in the Times, though. And I'm interested, again, with you guys who are political guys. It said something about that a guy like Bannon, they'll wait, he'll get charged, it'll take time. You know, the Justice Department moves slowly, which they do. Then he'll pretend he wants a trial. And meanwhile, a couple of years he hopes will pass and things will change somehow. Or maybe 2022 will happen and that things will change. But you can't run a justice system based on what might happen down the road. If they don't answer and they don't show up and they don't comply with subpoenas, you go to jail. That's what happens. If it happened here in the Eastern District of Michigan, you're going to jail. That's all there is to it. And criminal contempt, keep in mind, it's not the same. Civil contempt is literally just forcing someone to do something. And then when they do it, that's the end of the contempt. Criminal contempt is a criminal charge. And he can be found guilty of contempt of the Congress, of criminal contempt, and you can be sentenced just like a guy can be sentenced for selling dope or for mail fraud. I mean, and I think they need to do it with every last one of these guys. And then you'll find out how tough, you know, Lewandowski, he's a big tough guy too, right? Boasting that lady, the wife of the big contributor. He's a big tough guy. Fine. Get him where he's looking at a jail cell. Because, 48 years, I've seen a lot of that. Most of the guys that I represented, they are tough guys. Jail, fine. I can do my 5 to 10. I can do 15 if I have to. But a lot of these kind of guys, they can't do 15 minutes, let alone 15 years or 15 months.
So do you think the executive privilege argument that Bannon's using is pretty flimsy?
I think it's complete horseshit. Because here's the issue. First thing, the things they want to ask him about, he wasn't working for Trump anymore. He was out on his yacht stealing from those people who contribute to Trump. He was committing more crimes instead of, he wasn't working for him. That's A. B, a privilege argument. Okay, privilege. That's an argument you make after you show up. I've represented people, grand jury proceedings, right? They want to ask about attorney-client conversation. Excuse me, we got to go see the judge. I assert the privilege. Well, the client asserts the privilege. I argue it for her or him, and the judge makes a ruling. You can't just tell the Congress to go screw themselves because I have executive privilege. Come there, show up, and then have your lawyer say, look, we refuse to answer. Then you have to go to the appropriate judicial authority who'll decide one way or the other. But quite frankly, I think that's just another scam with respect to Bannon in particular. Now, when Meadows and some of those other people come in, that might be a different issue, but they still got to go. And then they can assert that privilege. Unfortunately, before with Barr as AG, they were able to get away with all that shit. They'd come and they'd make some kind of blah, and he'd say, fine, wonderful. And so that they never had to go forward with it. And I'm telling you guys, once it starts to move forward, look at the people who have been arrested and convicted in the riot on January 6th. They were all tough guys. Oh, we're tough guys. We're ex-soldiers. We're this, we're that. And all of them are taking a cop, every one of them. And why? Because they're getting a lighter sentence. Some of them aren't getting sentenced at all. It's a
Except for that guy that represented himself and caught 2 more felonies, right?
Well, that's look at P.T. Barnum was correct, and I say the same thing about the rally you guys were covering in Lansing. A fool's born every minute. I mean, there's not any doubt about that. So I can't speak for all, but most people, I'm telling you, you confront them with going to jail or prison, and all of a sudden that tough guy atmosphere. Oh, really? I don't want to do that. There you go. That's what I think will happen if they keep pushing these guys, because none of them are really tough guys.
Wow. So let's see. We've already got James Craig. You painted with Pretzel Logic, and I think with Ben, and you got Kid Charlemagne. So I think we're running the whole table of Steely Dan songs, which not complaining here at all.
I was going to say real quick on it just came to my mind with the Lansing rally, is that there's good chance that there were undercover FBI, undercover state police there. That's where a lot of these groups do their recruiting, and they're not very selective. They're so desperate to get people. And so there could be people, law enforcement there undercover, just to make sure that nobody's trying to recruit for any kind of crazy plots or anything. So,
well, as we know, at some of the rallies that took place in Lansing last year to protest the governor's COVID restrictions, that was where some of the planning went down. So it would be a fair bet.
Yeah, when I was at
the numbers are even lower that showed up.
When I was at the Washington Post, I covered a rally in front of the Israeli embassy, and it was all these neo-Nazis who were rallying supposedly on behalf of the Palestinians and freedom for Palestine and a rope for every Finkelstein. That was their chant out there. And there were a lot of skinheads and doing the Zig Heils. And about maybe a month and a half later, I was at a retirement party at the FBI Washington field office, and I see a guy with shaved head, and I look at him, I go, "Weren't you at the rally?" And he goes, "Yeah, that was me." They had a lot of undercover guys there, and then there was a Nazi concert in Baltimore that night, and I know there were quite a few undercover FBI guys there. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. Steve, can I ask you a quick question? I was just curious. This news about Chief Hollywood Craig and him not being certified as a police officer here in Michigan, and some folks making some hay of it. Is it? You don't have to be certified to wear the uniform, and you don't have to be certified to carry a weapon. Am I right? I mean, you can open carry still, right?
Are you talking about carrying a weapon, or are we talking about being the police chief?
Well, I mean,
you can carry a weapon if you have a license.
Everybody's got a CCW permit these days. Well, they don't call them that anymore. But you know what Gil Scott-Heron said tonight? We're not talking Steely Dan. He said everybody's got a pistol. Remember the song Gun 40 years ago? The most prescient song ever written, in my opinion. But anyway, go ahead.
No. So my question is, if you're not certified as a police officer and you're serving as the chief, can you carry and act as a police officer? Is it a big deal? Do you have to be certified?
I honestly, I don't know, but my guess would be that to be the police chief, you probably don't have to be. That'd be my guess. Just because the police chief's not out on routine patrol on 7 Mile, with a pistol and that'd be my guess, but I don't know. That's not something that I'd ever have to deal with. Police chiefs have never been witnesses in cases, let's put it that way, unless they were their own defendant, like Chief Hart.
Well, I'm sure you've had to help people out who got pinched for illegally carrying, right?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Although nowadays I'm going back to Gil Scott, everybody's got a pistol. They don't even want to bring CCW cases anymore because no one's going to jail for it anyway. This is what I understand. That's what I'm hearing in state court. In federal court's different.
The one with the gun doesn't get you two anymore?
If you're doing something else, that's felony firearm. That's if you're committing another felony at the same time.
I think Greg, as long as you've stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, you can be police chief. So you got that going for you. I'm sorry, Susan, did you have something?
Oh, well, we had a former Michigan Speaker of the House who brought a loaded handgun onto a plane, and he got away with it. So it seems like things are rather lenient these days for some people.
Jerry Oliver did the same thing when he was the police chief. He forgot he had his gun. He was getting on the plane. That's about 20 years ago, and they made a big stink, but it really turned into nothing. It happens more often than you think. With people who have CCW permits because they think their gun is part of their anatomy, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I remember when I forgot that I had that nail clipper on, and what a scene that made. Susan, you mentioned flying. I don't think that that the former speaker would have made any headway on Southwest Airlines because, as many of you know, the airline has had to cancel thousands of flights over the last few days based on a purported sick out by pilots. This seems to be all roped into the whole vaccine mandate that airlines like Southwest Airlines and American Airlines have undertaken. A response from Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, where both of these airlines are hubbed and headquartered, trying to push back on big business and corporations, saying that private companies cannot enforce a vaccine mandate. Where's all this going, Susan? I mean, how is the PR for an airline? I mean, do you think that they're going to lose passengers, or are they going to gain passengers?
It's really not clear to me that Southwest is directly related to the vax mandate. I mean, I'm sure there are some pilots, but it's kind of been a mess PR-wise. The initial reporting on it did not indicate that, but then you had people like Ted Cruz jump all over and say this is what it was. I mean, the airlines have had problems for years, as anyone knows. I mean, there are problems with pay for flight attendants, for pilots, especially in, airlines that are more in the bargain sector. It's just been a nightmare for people, for the staff on planes, with angry people who refuse to wear masks, getting punched, trying to break up fights. So, I mean, I have not flown since January of 2020, so I have not seen any of this firsthand, but it certainly hasn't made me very eager to jump back on a plane. And I don't think I'm alone.
Yeah, I've flown twice. I flew to Utah and I flew to Lisbon. So one domestic and one international. And people were quite well behaved. Both flights were on Delta. And while Delta has had issues, it seems as though just an unscientific poll, other airlines, particularly Southwest and American, seem to be
Spirit.
Well, that's because some people may not consider Spirit to be an airline. It's just an aviation phenomenon, Alan. So you'll have to forgive me on that.
Yeah.
But I still have 5,000 miles that I can use on Spirit, which actually would get me a free ticket somewhere, which is kind of scary. But Steve, you're finding that this is also happening in the NBA. NBA superstar Kyrie Irving seems to be getting ready to ride the pine quite a bit. His Brooklyn Nets have suspended him because now he's admitted that he's been received a single dose, but he's been quite vocal about both his own vaccine ambiguity and also advocating for freedom of choice. How is this going to play out in the NBA? How's this going to play out with large companies like basketball and players of the stature of Kyrie Irving pushing back?
I think the best thing about the NBA is Adam Silver, the commissioner. He's an excellent commissioner. I think a lot of the owners are progressive people in the NBA. Kyrie Irving has managed to combine some of the best basketball talent I've ever seen in my life, along with being an absolute and total moron. He's a member of the Flat Earth Society, of all things. He can give you a very long discussion about, you have the right to think the earth is round, but I have the right to think the earth is flat. I think that that they're going to stick by that. It helps when you have Kevin Durant and James Harden on your team, of course. And they did go to the semifinals last year with Irving sitting on the side with his sprained ankle, which earned him the enmity of almost anybody that's ever played ball. But I believe that they're going to stick with it. I think that they're going to, either you're going to get vaccinated or you're not. The next one to look at will be the Washington Wizards, where Bradley Beal, who's an all-pro player as well, he's adamant about vaccination. We'll see what happens with them. But I think with Silver as the commissioner, I think that the teams will get backed up. And I think these guys are just going to have to make up their mind. As much money as Irving's made in his career, I guarantee he doesn't want to lose the 25 or 30 million that he'll miss if he's suspended for the entire season.
And the thing is, in New York, you're not allowed. I don't know if it's a city ordinance or a state ordinance. You're not allowed to play in the arena in New York if you're not vaccinated. So he misses half the games of the season, and no team wants to put up with that kind of crap. It's also, we see with Tyler Bertuzzi from the Red Wings. Same thing. He can't travel to Canada. He can't go to Canada for games. And, these guys, I don't know. Look, I don't know. It bothers me. Not only are you putting the team in jeopardy as a team for, winning. I mean, I think he had a hat trick last night, but you're also putting players in jeopardy of health-wise, of getting other people sick.
I think, though, Alan, I think you guys have to keep in mind, it's hard to overemphasize the egomania of a lot of these really great players. These guys, a guy like Irving, he was probably a great player when he was 6. He's been spoiled his entire life. I watched him play at Duke. He's a ridiculously great player. But their mentality, if you read his mea culpa, it wasn't a mea culpa. It was, oh, poor, pitiful me. I'm getting screwed. Eugene Robinson wrote a great column in the Washington Post
I read
today,
that. Yep.
that I really thought was right on the money. But you got to keep that in mind with these guys. These guys are almost 100% egocentric. In a sense, that's what helps them become great players, because they don't give a shit about anybody else. But don't be surprised when you see people act the way Irving's acted, because he's not thinking about infecting other people. He's thinking about poor, pitiful me. That's the way he is.
Well, Greg, I mean, this, as Steve is saying, and as Alan's saying too, I mean, these players wield a tremendously large persona and influence on kids. I mean, I remember talking to some young kids. They were scrunching up some paper and throwing it into the garbage can, and they kept yelling Kobe. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And they said, oh, don't you know who Kobe Bryant is? I'm like, yeah, but I also know who Pistol Pete is, and he would have whipped Kobe's ass. But that's a whole different story. What a wonderful player to watch Maravich play back in the day. But what about this whole idea about influence? I mean, do you think that people like Kyrie are going to make kids really question their own decision-making when it comes to their health and say, well, if Kyrie is saying that I don't need to be vaxxed, then I'm not going to get vaxxed?
Personally, I don't see those guys as having that kind of influence. I think we've seen, haven't we, over time, where they've tried to use rock stars or ball players or whatever. And I don't know that it ever, at the end of the day, really does anything about it. I was disappointed in LeBron James's response, because I think he's been really great on a lot of things, but he kind of was a little wishy-washy about it. And I do think a guy like LeBron, I don't know if the children listen to him, but he carries a lot of weight, because you can make a decent argument he's the greatest player ever, after Chamberlain, of course, but nobody talks about him anymore.
Yeah, I mean, basketball, you have a couple of stars, like in football, like in baseball, where some of these folks are mega stars and the rest of them are just bit players. And there was a time when sports really captured the imagination of, all of us, the way that it would normally be set up. And I think it started with the NFL, and they were setting things up as like these big gladiator contests, and you can hear the dramatic music and all that stuff. And I believe
some football by Hank Williams Jr.
I don't know about that, but I do know that over time, we have pushed back at the way that we have lifted up the stars, and they don't have as much influence as they used to. I mean, I would argue that, Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and all of them had way more influence than the stars do now. And it would seem to be more spread out. So but it's not just them, that's the interesting thing. The anti-vaxxers and this hesitancy that is occurring seems to be coming in from high places all over the place. I mean, I was listening to a story the other day, and we were just talking about it. The airlines pilots, some of them who are saying they don't want to get vaccinated because they're afraid that it would impact their ability to remain qualified to fly, because of the side effects and this, that, and the other. And of course, our CDC folks are like, that's a bunch of BS. It's, we've had hundreds of millions of shots, and there's no way in the world that will happen. But we're seeing that kind of thing happen. And what's interesting is that it seems to be taking root in a way that allows for it to be part of the counterculture and pop culture. And that's a scary sort of like thing. It's one thing to, to oppose the man, because, you're fighting the power, but it's another thing to engage in utter foolishness that really puts you at risk unnecessarily and everybody else. And we've got to find a way, I think, as a society to get around that. I don't know, part of it is like, why are we even having this discussion? We've given way too much leeway to this. Back in the day, if you wanted to go to school, you had to get a shot. If you want to go to, if you want to go to the Philippines or some of these places where there's malaria, you got to get a shot. You got to take the malaria pill. You got to do all that stuff before you go. There's no arguing about it. There's no I need my freedom stuff about it. This is the deal. And so maybe that's where maybe we've become too much of a snowflake when it comes to that. Maybe we should just, do what needs to be done in order to keep people safe and stop playing around with it.
Right.
Well, by the way, there is now a vaccine for malaria that has been approved. So fingers crossed on that. Yeah. Alan.
Well, no, you have to take. There are pills that you take to prevent yourself from getting malaria. Come on.
No, but now there's also a vaccine. It was just.
You said there is a vaccine.
Yeah,
I thought you said there is not.
Yep, Alan.
I was going to say there's so many countries like in Europe. You can't get into a restaurant without your vaccination card. Israel was so clamped down on people. You couldn't go within a certain distance beyond your home. When you flew into the country, you were quarantined for 2 weeks. They put you in a hotel. You couldn't leave. Everybody, and these are democracies, but there are some things that need to be precautions that need to be taken. We have laws about wearing a seatbelt, about not driving drunk. Everyone could say, hey, I get to drink. You can't tell me how much I can drink, and you can't tell me I can't get in my car and go home. It's my car. It's my freedom. There's arguments that can be made, and the bottom line is that we need to protect all of society, not just a couple people here and there.
Well, look, I mean, after the latex glove treatment right after 9/11, I mean, the measures that it takes to get on a plane now because of COVID are much more comforting, let me tell you.
Man, did you have to do that?
Well,
that imagery is just too much, brother.
About Doc Anderson there. Don't do that again.
Let's call that a metaphor then. But Susan, you're nodding your head. I mean, is this as Greg is suggesting? Is this an American phenomenon of the big four sports? I mean, I'm thinking about Formula One. I'm thinking about cricket. I'm thinking about soccer. I mean, the biggest sport in the world. I mean, when 3 British or English soccer players announced that they're not going to vax for the national team, there was all kinds of outrage. I mean, people questioned, and I think, Alan, you mentioned this word earlier, their patriotism, saying, you go ahead and take one for the team, you vaccinate, and, of course, England's not going to win the World Cup, unfortunately, again. But at least you can go give it a try.
Well, in America, we are really big on the idea that you're not the boss of me. So I think that, you definitely have a constituency here for people who, feel like you don't have the right to tell me what to do. I'm just asking questions. I know more than doctors. And we've seen this mentality for years. I mean, you wouldn't see so much vaccine hesitancy now if you hadn't had anti-vaxxers who had made big headway, with celebrities, with Republicans who have introduced legislation in Michigan for years, well before COVID, taking aim at vaccine mandates for schools. So I think one thing that gets lost in the shuffle, as a lot of us are pretty disturbed by seeing this rhetoric, is vaccine mandates work. I mean, what we've seen, like United is like 99% vax now that they have a requirement. The NBA, very similar numbers. Vaccine mandates will get the people who will say, no way, never do it. But when you say, well, it's this or your job, they'll do it. And that's what we need, because we're still under herd immunity here. Kids under 12 can't get the shot. Immunocompromised people who are, severely immunocompromised can't. We owe it to them to protect them. So vaccine mandates are really helping us get there.
And apparently all of those chips that have been injected into people is not setting off the metal detectors at the airport. So, they must really have this thing down to a different science. But when we're talking,
George Soros has all the stuff, though. Don't worry. Between he and Gates, they'll be able to tell you anything you want to know about what chip you have in your head.
When we're looking, though, at the social landscape today, I mean, those who, of course, are on social media and are communicating ideas which might be, shall we say, avant-garde, and then backlashes that are faced. We've got a couple of interesting ones out there. One is the discussion around Dave Chappelle's latest special, The Closer, which was on Netflix, which was apparently recorded here at our very own Fox Theater in Detroit. A lot of debate regarding the cancel culture because of Chappelle's purported focus on the trans community. The co-CEO of Netflix, Ted Sarandos, seems to have doubled down on supporting Chappelle, saying that, well, the content, quote, doesn't directly translate to real world harm. That, along with the revelation that the new Superman, John Kent, son of Kal-El / Clark Kent and Lois Lane, is bisexual. This seems to be more than just fodder for Republican social media, which I'm sure is completely losing its mind, but also a broader discussion that's happening in the country. So, Greg, what do you think about these kinds of issues? What about some of the arguments that Chappelle made? Because he seems to be pretty much dug in and saying, that's right. This just proves my point that cancel culture is there for a very selective group of people and is hypocritical.
Well, come on, man. They're using this as a way to get more eyes on the comedy special. And I think they're using it to great effect, to be honest with you, as it relates to pumping up the audience for Dave Chappelle and for Netflix, even in their resistance in terms of wanting to pull it. The opportunity for something like this to manifest itself politically is there, but it isn't really being taken advantage of by anybody, whether those who are on the left or the right, in terms of moving this issue forward as it relates to fighting for equality for LGBTQ folks. And I'm not really sure why that hasn't happened yet. Either with, the Trumpian people going like, see, there you go. Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. I understand why it's happened on the right, because he's black. Of course, they would never do that. That's like arguing for gun rights for the brother that got shot by the cop when he was trying to show the cop his CCW license. Where was the outrage? Oh, of course there was not going to be the outrage. It's a brother. They can't do that up against that backdrop. And so there's nothing really to push back against for the left here, because the audience is not wide enough with that Netflix thing. Now, if it was, I don't know if you've seen that, but Squid Games is the #1 show in the world, and that is an amazing series. So if Chappelle's audience got that big, then maybe there would be an opportunity for that, but it's just not. Just don't see it, man. I mean, this is Netflix pumping up their show, and they're getting eyeballs on it, and that means more money.
I think Chappelle should switch over and start doing his jokes in Korean. So, Susan, I mean, why is it that it seems as though politicians are not jumping on? I mean, there have been a couple of cases where some people have tweeted their supposed outrage at Superman becoming bisexual now. But is it just something that's too hot to handle, that no one wants to really try to move the needle on this?
I've definitely seen some Republicans agitate against it, and it seems rather comical. It's just kind of like send outrage tweets, and not too much else behind it. I think with Dave Chappelle, fundamentally, how is this an argument about cancel culture? He's still making $40 million. There's been no cancellation, and obviously, I think his history of really incisive comedy about racism means he doesn't have much of an audience on the right. And a lot of people still don't really care about transgender rights. So, I think Greg really, put his finger on why this hasn't broken through like some controversies have.
Steve,
I think.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, different groups at different times get that status where you can't offend them, you can't say really horrible things about them. But until then, groups get away with. I mean, people get away with like for a long time, you could still make Arab jokes until until suddenly the Arabs got it together and had a and got it together, and so we're seeing it with the transgender. They obviously, as Susan points out, I mean, the status is not there yet to say, hey, back off, because I think there's just not enough collective outrage. I try to figure if Dave Chappelle was making like Jewish jokes and stuff like that, I'd probably be okay with it to some degree, but then at some point, I don't know. I mean, if he just went on and on and on, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of people who don't know anyone who's transgender. There's a lot of people who don't know anyone who's Jewish. They don't know anyone who's black. And so some of those jokes play up on stereotypes that people,
Well, the other thing that I find curious about this that seems to be, and all this relates to Trumpyism and the Trumpyism stuff, from this perspective, the arguments about whataboutism, that seems to have gone away, certainly dissipated in lots of ways. Whenever there was an issue that would be brought up, you would get this false equivalency that would be played up over and over and over again, particularly from the right, on the whataboutisms. And here, I haven't heard the whataboutism as it relates to, this argument. Wow, Dave Chappelle gets to do it, Meanwhile, we've got the coach, the greatest football coach in NFL history getting drummed out for making racist, sexist, homophobic comments. It's an attack on the white man and the brother gets away with it. What about that? I'm surprised we haven't seen more of that happen.
Well, Steve, I'm going to ask a whataboutism of you. What about Lenny Bruce? What about George Carlin? I mean,
Just literally, I cannot believe you said that. I was about to say Lenny Bruce. George
Carlin. We're on a delay here, Steve, so I think that's why.
Honest to God, that's amazing. In that order, I was going to say it. Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, the greatest comedian of my lifetime, Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor really is the best person to point out for this, because look how he talked until he went. Those of us who are big fans of his and watched him, we know what the name of one of his albums was. Okay, so we know where he was at.
It marked the 200th anniversary of this country.
These guys were operating at a different time, though. I listened to Greg and Susan. You guys are operating in the political environment. Just everything is out there for everybody. Ann Applebaum wrote a fantastic column, in my opinion, not a column, a long article in the Atlantic talking about the effects of some of this, what people are calling cancel culture. It wasn't directed at right or left. It was just directed with summaries of people who've had this problem. They've said something and they're teaching at Yale Law School or something, and the next thing you know, everybody makes a big stink. I think what you guys are saying makes a lot of sense. It depends on who it is that's getting, I don't know if the right word is offended or not getting treated properly. If you've got a group that's large enough, I agree with both of you guys about that. If it's a large enough group, then you're going to have problems. If you do it for left-handed guys with one eye who play basketball on one leg, the three people that are in the country probably aren't going to get a big hearing on it. I think Lenny Bruce and George Carlin are two perfect examples of, I don't know how they get over today. And Pryor, he knew he had his finger on the pulse of the society for sure. And maybe he'd be able to navigate it today, but who knows?
Well, and it's on that point that Susan and Alan and all you guys, one of the things that's got me concerned about this particular political cycle, this midterm cycle, is that we still haven't found a way to talk about racism, sexism, homophobia, openly and honestly, that allows to have a dialogue. And one of the things that really concerns me, and I've been hearing this more and more and more, is when I hear a politician say, well, one, I'm not a politician, I hate that, but two, when they say that, well, I'm tired of this divisiveness. If you raise an issue around race, the white politician goes, well, I'm tired of this issue about why are we so divisive? Why are you bringing up race? Why is everything so divisive? We got to get beyond that. Why can't we get beyond that? And to be honest with you, I was really surprised to hear Mayor Duggan, who I think has done a great job and can carry the flag in a lot of ways for Detroiters, say that about dodging a debate with Anthony Adams. Oh, I'm just so tired of this divisiveness, And that's the thing. When I hear that, that's what we generally hear when people don't want to address issues of racism or sexism or something like that. They want to blame you for raising the issue by deflecting and saying this is divisive.
Right. I mean, that's really what the entire debate in the Michigan legislature over critical race theory is right now. It's let's just not talk about race. Let's not talk about racial inequality. Let's not talk about slavery. Let's not talk about discrimination. It's all too negative, and you're making me feel bad. They can't really define what critical race theory is specifically, but they just know that talking about racism makes them upset, which is why Republicans don't want it discussed in school.
Well, and you see this happening in Tennessee, which the legislature has dictated that Black history will not be taught in school. I don't know how that happens, but at least we're not in Tennessee right now. So with that, we are now at that pivotal moment in the show where we will be going to Michael.
And now it's time for Deadline Detroit's nominees for Schmuck of the Week.
Okay, I know that we've discussed some possible candidates in that, but I also have a feeling that some of you are going to present someone anew. Susan, do you have a Schmuck of the Week?
I do. It was someone who was at the Audit rally, Representative Dara Rendon from Lake City. She's a Republican who decided to break out her QAnon pin and gave a somewhat cryptic answer. But if you're familiar with what the symbols are, it was clearly that. And it's come out that she does sometimes wear it in the legislature as well. So a lot of us have suspected that there are people who are, Q adjacent or, believe in some of the weird conspiracy theories. But now we have a card-carrying member who is in the legislature.
Wow. Shocked, I'm telling you.
You're more shocked than Louis was to find out there was gambling at Rick's Cafe, right?
Exactly. Steve, who do you have for us as
Well,
Schmuck?
I don't have a new one. You asked me about him. I decided before we even started, Kyrie Irving is my Schmuck of the Week for basically the reasons that we said. And just one real quick summary statement. When I was talking about the egotism that goes with being a big star, this guy takes it to a new level that he's willing to tank his own team, who's going to compete for the title. There's no doubt about it, with him or without him. And that, to me, just elevated him from just the average schmuck to the Donald Trump Schmuck of the Week award.
Right. And they have the Nets have such a great team. They have some big talent there.
Well, you can keep in mind, I watched Game 6 last year. Irving sat out with a sprained ankle. I mean, guys didn't miss basketball practice at Michigan in 1968 with a sprained ankle. Yeah. And Durant and Harden played 53 minutes, and Harden was playing on one leg. Wow. And when I watched that, I'm thinking, this guy is something wrong with this guy,
Well, back then, didn't Michigan have somebody with one eye, one leg, and was left-handed there, Steve?
I played like I had one eye and one leg. I am left-handed.
Okay. All right. Alan.
I am going to go with a woman named Gina Petty from the Carroll Independent School District in Texas, who has decided that if students are offered a book on the Holocaust, they should also have access to publications giving the other side of the Holocaust. And, a lot of people down in the school district are like, what's the other side? Like,
Right.
You want the other opinion that Jews are bad? We get it. I think it's, I don't know. It's just ridiculous. My parents are Holocaust survivors. And so when I read that kind of stuff, when you hear about Holocaust deniers and that, hey, there's no mitigating circumstances that make it okay. So anyway.
I don't even think that's available in Germany. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not.
Yeah.
So, wow.
I mean, when I saw that, I thought this must be this can't be real.
The Onion.
Yeah, The Onion.
Seriously.
I think your first grammatical instinct was correct there, Greg. You should have just let that one out. But Greg, go ahead.
My Schmuck of the Week is former Detroit Police Chief James Craig for creeping up to the line there about the big lie and all that stuff. I mean, I know that you want to win. I know you want to win the Republican nomination so that you can get squashed by Governor Whitmer and go down in flames. You want to have that, as the end and the beginning of your political career. More power to you. But at the same time, as somebody who had sort of built up this trust in Detroit and around the state for the work that you have been doing as chief, and I will say that some of them will just, say it was all lies and stuff like that from the beginning. But let's just say you were able to navigate. You get hired by Snyder. You get hired by the emergency manager. You survive a changeover to a mayor. You do all that stuff, and then you embrace the big lie. And so it is. I just it's just pandering to the nth degree, and it's not going to work out well for you doing stuff like that. So that's my Schmuck of the Week, because doing stuff like that is the kind of thing that makes people not believe in politicians and the political process, that, people will just say or do anything to get elected. And so that's my guy, Chief Craig, Schmuck of the Week.
Man, I want a t-shirt of that. That would be great. Greg, you gotta, that should be the Schmuck of the Week t-shirt right there. Okay. Well, as far as Schmuck of the Week goes, I had one, which Alan and I share, which was Gina Petty. I saw that and I was just, before we used to say Florida, now I guess we're increasingly saying Texas. But my Schmuck of the Week is going to probably be a little bit unpopular for some of you. My Schmuck of the Week is Paul McCartney. He gave an interview in which he essentially said that it was John Lennon who broke up the Beatles. Speaking to David Remnick in the New Yorker, even Remnick said that he was quite charming and all, but very shrewd. Paul says, well, it wasn't me who went ahead and broke up the Beatles. That was actually John. He had this idea about going ahead and doing this, and well, he took his own route. Well, that doesn't explain the fact that in April of 1970, Paul McCartney's solo album came out, and John's didn't come out until October of 1970. And part of the whole issue about the conflict was that Paul wanted to bring in his brother-in-law, Linda's brother, to handle the accounts over at Apple Records, whereas the other three were with Alan Klein because they didn't want the obvious family conflict of interest. But it's interesting that on the threshold of Peter Jackson's much anticipated movie, Get Back, which is footage of the Beatles and their whole Let It Be and their concert up on the rooftop, that Paul McCartney, without any kind of pushback from John, revising history to fit his own narrative, shows a little bit of insecurity and a little bit of unfair play. So my Schmuck of the Week, and I'm sorry, Paul, but I've always been a John person anyway, you are my Schmuck of the Week.
We shouldn't forget, by the way, Sad, we shouldn't forget that he also said the Rolling Stones were a blues cover band.
Yeah,
That's what I
you guys are dating yourself here. Talking about the Beatles and Rolling Stone. You guys got to get hip. Let's, get in the 21st century.
Well,
you don't know about that stuff.
We could have talked about Kanye dumping his Wyoming ranch, but talking about Kanye no longer West. would be a little bit hackneyed. Well, listen, thank you all for being part of another terrific The Week That Was. Susan Demas from Michigan Advance.
I love that magazine.
Steve Fishman, criminal defense attorney, U of M basketball extraordinaire, and Steely Dan fan. And then Greg Bowens of Greg Bowens PR company. And of course, our maestro, Alan Lengel. I kick it to you, sir.
Drive home safely.
The Craig Foley Show on Deadline Detroit is made possible in part by Lynette's Shrimp House, located in Highland Park. It's Metro Detroit's premier destination, serving juicy fried shrimp, fish, and wings, alongside soul food sides and new additions to the menu like turkey tacos and desserts. Located at 13548 Woodward in Highland Park, just north of the Davison, Lynette's is open for takeaway noon to 8 Tuesday and Thursday, noon to 10 p.m. Friday and Saturday, and noon to 5 p.m. on Sunday. Call now, get some Lynette's.